So, where are we starting from? What chapter? We wanted to go over 6, wasn't it? I mean, not what the reading is for today, but what we haven't finished. Isn't that right?
6 and 7?
Yeah, 6 and 7. I think there were still some questions outstanding on 6. It does, doesn't it? Yeah. And what I said earlier was that if Asaṅga was going to play tricks, it would be in the 7th chapter. And I think in approaching it, it certainly smells of it. It smells of playing tricks, doesn't it? And I think some tricks do come, or maybe come. And so first we have to figure out what those tricks might be, and then see if they are tricks. And our context is the perspective that Indians love to play terms different ways. You know, once you set up 3 terms, then use all 3 for one of them, but with different senses, so that it ends up as non-contradictory. And Indians also play with total contradiction. The Brahman is both here and there, near and far, right? Because Brahman pervades everything. But of course, if all of Brahman pervades here, how can it pervade, all of it pervade there? Does a part of all of it, or does it have 2 walls? You know. So maybe we ought to look at 7, unless somebody has a specific topic to bring up with regard to 6, since the biggest play is in 7. Now, on page 223, in the first indented, in the only indented material, some of the great vehicle. So then that, because Asaṅga speaks of these opponents as some of the great vehicle, one knows that he accepts that the opposing party is of the great vehicle. He's not saying some nihilist, something like that. So you see, that's very interesting, that there's a recognition, and the only person's systems, or, you know, system it can be is Mādhyamika. And whether it's both Swatantrika and Prasaṅgika or just Prasaṅgika, it's not so relevant here. So it means they do accept them as being Buddhist, but as having mistaken meaning. And whether they accept just what the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras say, conventionally all exist, ultimately all do not exist. And what they're saying is they're dumb enough to take this literally and not understand the 3 natures and the 3 non-natures. And so the bracketed addition from Akulotra Gyatso and Jigmetamsha Gyatso is, I feel, completely justified as to who the opponents are. Now, one thing that's odd is those proponents of naturelessness are to be asked, venerable ones. See, they're even called venerable ones. What is the ultimate? What is paramartha? What is samvrti? And one thing that's odd in the way Tsongkhapa plays it out, he doesn't take it as what is ultimate and what is conventional, you know, all other phenomena. He says, what's the ultimate, you know, and that's fine. But then he says, what is the concealer? Samvrti is taken to be the concealer, because in Samvrti Satya, the prime meaning of samvrti is that which conceals reality. But once a person asks a question about the ultimate, paramartha and samvrti, you would expect either to be what's the ultimate consciousness and what is the concealing consciousness to balance it. Or what is the ultimate and what are truths for jerks, okay? You wouldn't expect the question to shift in the middle. So clearly, a distinction is being forced here. And one has to think of what the other possibilities may be. That the ultimate is a consciousness, just as the conventional is a consciousness, or the concealer is a consciousness. Or that just as the ultimate is emptiness, so samvrti are fake. It's another word. What are the fakes? But then the answer is the fakes are a consciousness. It's odd. When asked this, the proponents of when you look into it, you can't see the game. You can't see some obvious position that's trying to be covered up, that Sangha was trying to cover up. When asked this, the proponents of naturelessness answer, that which is the naturelessness of all phenomena is the ultimate. The absence, if you put it for prasangika, the absence of inherent existence. For swatantrika, the absence of true existence. You could say that for prasangika, because true existence and inherent existence are in Sangha's system equivalent for them, but they're not equivalent in his view on swatantrika. So that's clear enough. Mere absence. That which observes those phenomena which are without nature as having such a nature is samvrti. Now, that which observes can only be a consciousness. So you get the answer to the ultimate with a negative, right? A mere negative, an absence, an emptiness, true existence. And for samvrti, they talk about a consciousness. Why? Because it conceals what does not exist, imputes, verbalizes, and makes designations. And the commentators cleverly, commentator, whoever it is, cleverly makes up something interesting for each of these. Puts in something. And you can see the meaning of conceals for samvrti here. So I can't pry apart the game here. I think Sangha may have identified the passage correctly, Notice that there is this a lack of parallelism between ultimate and between paramartha and samvrti. Tam gunzo. Now, ultimate, you say, what is the ultimate? For instance, phenomena in Mādhyamika, phenomena are empty of the ultimate, empty of turndown ki dongba. So what is that turndown? Can be inherent existence, true existence. It's the gaccha, the object of negation. So the term turndown is used both for the actual ultimate, the absence of the object of negation, and its use for the object of negation, according to context. No paradox, but you do have to know which one you're talking about at the moment. So that's what he's saying here. The question here about what the ultimate is concerns an illustration of ultimate truth. Just what is ultimate truth, which cannot stand for the object of negation, and not that non-existent nature, meaning inherent existence, ultimate existence, whatever, due to their non-existence as which objects are said not to exist ultimately. You can imagine it. Took me a little time to handle the Tibetan on that. And I'll be interested to see if Bill comes back with a way to say this that's more felicitous. Otherwise, now you see, Tsongkhapa is defending his own interpretation that that ultimate doesn't refer to the gakja, rather it refers to ultimate truth. He says otherwise, it would not be reasonable for the proponents of naturelessness to profess in the answer to the above question that the naturelessness of phenomena is the ultimate, right? I mean, it would be a silly answer. Because the proponents of the middle do not posit something as existing ultimately due to existing as the selflessness of phenomena, which they assert to be the ultimate. Now, it's twisted, but it's approachable. Also, the question about the concealer, or question about samvrti, gunzo, concerns the samvrti in samvrti satya, in the face of which things are posited as truths, and is not a question concerning the conventionality in the face of which things exist conventionally. So even he doesn't answer the question. He has a choice between two consciousnesses. He doesn't posit here a choice. The third choice, which you would expect, would be conventional phenomena, right? Does he not give us that choice even? Otherwise, it would not be reasonable for opponents in the middle to propound that that which apprehends what a naturalist as having nature is samvrti. For such consciousness is one. Blah, blah, blah. He doesn't consider the most obvious, what to me is the most obvious problem that arises from reading parallelism into Tentam and Gunzo. So then, the response by Asaṅga is that if this concealing consciousness arises from causes and conditions, or do you say that it arises from causes and conditions? Or is it merely imputed? If it arises from causes and conditions, it's not suitable to say that this consciousness does not ultimately exist, does not exist by way of its own character. If it only imputedly exists, how can it function? You see, that's how simple the question is. It's only imputedly exists, doesn't exist by way of its own character. How could it function? It's as good as imagining an elephant out there and then assuming that the elephant can pick up the trees that they've cut down. You know? The elephant can't. Your imaginary elephant.
But there are existent imputations.
Yes, but they don't function. They don't produce things. They don't produce effects. Uncompounded space doesn't produce anything. It allows for movement, allows to put this object there, but it doesn't produce anything. Anything that produces must be established by way of its own character. And then Tsongkhapa says, well, then it must be that by extension, the final nature of these things which exist by way of their own character must exist by way of its own character, although it doesn't produce anything. And then he is to be asked, well, what about the final nature of uncompounded space? Uncompounded space doesn't exist by way of its own character. Why do you say that its final reality exists by way of its own character? This could be called the obsession with uncompounded space. You know, that it stands out as, it becomes the thorn. And you can look in Xuanzang's presentation of this, having used 10 Indian commentaries on Vasubandhu's The 30, and you can see that it's not, as I've said earlier, not a Gelugpa hang-up, but something that hung up Indians and Chinese, Tibetans alike. Probably Tibetans took it to its extreme. That fits with the culture.
It seems like all the debates that Asaṅga brings up between mind-only and Mādhyamika, they all just stop when they get to, if it's not established by way of its own character, then it can't.
Yes.
They don't go any further than that.
Yeah, that seems to be the issue. At least the ones that are brought up here. And I don't know what other ones there might be, and it'd be most interesting to find out that there aren't any other ones. You know? That this truly is not just sifted out of the controversies, but is the controversy. And it comes because the Sutra Unraveling the Thought says that which does not exist by way of its own character is not produced. And the other statement, not quite so direct, is that imputational natures are called Rangitsenyiki Neba Mayimbar, Tope Taksam du Trubena Tsenyingonyimeva. So once, rephrasing the sutra a little, but the sutra has two parts, those two parts. Once the sutra itself says this about Gunda, then the suggestion is that Shenwang are Rangitsenyiki Truba. But it's fortunate that there's another place in the sutra where it says Rangitsenyiki Matrumna Trebu Gegamares. So that's that one. Then on page 227, now we notice in the first indent, we also say, venerable ones, why is it that those that are observed are not existent? Now they just, Asaṅga just said not existent. But he's reading into this existent by way of their own character, because that's the bone of contention. You see, in Tsongkhapa's view, once the Mādhyamikas or the Prasangikas hold that objects are not existent by way of their own character, or the Swatantrikas hold that ultimately objects are not existent by way of their own character, even if they are conventionally existent by way of their own character. Okay? These types of objects, Shenwang. Then they're as good as non-existent. Once they hold that. Now, but certainly the mind-only people saw that the Mādhyamikas hold that all phenomena exist conventionally. You see? Certainly they noticed that. Now, whether they thought that even the Mādhyamikas said this functions as existing, you see, you might say, the Mādhyamikas might say they exist conventionally, they exist imputedly, or the Prasangikas say they exist imputedly, and you ask them, well, does that mean exist? And they say no, because it's just imputed. A whole lot of people in Tibet said that. And Asaṅga was arguing against them. So he's trying to make the case that when Asaṅga dumps on the Mādhyamikas, he's not saying you hold that these don't exist. He's saying you hold that they conventionally exist and don't exist by way of their own character. But Asaṅga, have we seen anything? You know, whenever you see anything exist by way of its own character that's from Asaṅga and not in brackets, it usually says exist, and then in brackets you get by way of its own character. What's the evidence that that's what the mind-only people are upset about? That the Mādhyamikas, that the Prasangikas say, well, that type of philosophy, though that type of philosopher is not assertive. That type of view puts forward. What are they upset about? That they say that things don't exist? That they say that things don't exist by way of their own character? Now, Tsongkhap's position is highly sensible. But in the sutra, says this, but it may be that Tsongkhapa is paying more attention to the sutra than Asaṅga did. At least that's part of it. Given that, even though Asaṅga quoted the whole sutra except the introduction. The whole sutra. And this is, now how could that possibly be? Well, Chandrakirti postdates Asaṅga. And he was upset about objected to Rangitsanya Gitroba in the Sutra Unraveling the Thought. And where else? Where are there source quotes in mind-only literature that say that Shenwang exists by way of their own character? Except the Sutra Unraveling the Thought, which Tsongkhapa, in his cleverness, noticed that Chandrakirti was bothered by and didn't accept as final. There is one statement by Sthirumati, one lousy statement, but it's a good statement, in which he, with regard to the word exists, he says inherently exists is to be added. Inherently is to be added. Of course, that was the wrong word. It should have been by way of its own character, but you can take the, you can stretch that one at least. He wanted to qualify exists with exists by way of its own character. Then there's a statement by Asaṅga, which says something like those which ultimately exist with an inexpressible essence. One lousy reference. Two lousy statements. And some, we know what we mean by lousy. Merely two statements. So in a way, Tsongkhapa with his agenda, with his Chandrakirti agenda, is emphasizing something that pretty much wasn't there in mind-only Buddhism in India. Well, that's the thesis that I'm working from.
So they didn't care.
Yeah. And maybe they didn't need to care because clear Mādhyamika proponents had not arisen yet, especially Chandrakirti. So then, in one way, it's reading something in another way, it's a brilliant observation. And on the first way, you can say, if you pay too much attention to this, you will not understand the intentionality of their own system. Because you see, it was not functioning in this context of emphasizing Rangitanya Gitruba, but was functioning in the context of Yerba and Mela. And people also, with respect to Rangshin Gitruba, that this business about existing imputational natures existing inherently, you know, that comes out of the agenda, to show that this so-called lower school is a stepping stone toward prasangika. Because you can understand Gunda dope daksam the yerbe culture functions or serves as existing. Serves isn't so good because usually what I translate as serves means it actually doesn't serve as. Function, though, is difficult because of the sense of producing something, but you can have two meanings of function. Actually does function as existing even in Chittamatra. Never mind in your prasangika. We were talking about this last time, right, or recently, where all phenomena are dope daksam. Dope daksam, the yerba de, yerba culture, existing it's merely imputed by conceptuality, functions as existing, because otherwise you'd fall to an extreme of nihilism. You see, once you look at it this way, you can see why other systems in Tibet would say that for prasangika, these phenomena don't exist. When you get right down to it, they don't exist. Rather than the ultimate wisdom merely refuting their inherent existence, refutes their existence. And then you can begin, once you begin to see the feasibility of their position, you can see the genius and the reading into of Tsongkhapa's position. You know how much he has to read in. But I'm saying the others aren't geniuses, they're geniuses, you know, in all of this. But you can't appreciate what he's doing until you can see that what other people are doing, until you see the possible holes in his own view, and to see the way that he's validating ethical actions and so forth with, you know, valid cognition, establishing them with valid cognition through not even letting ultimate analysis in Mādhyamika refute them. What it's refuting is their inherent existence. But when you refute inherent existence, nothing remains in your sight, unless you're a Buddha. And from that fact even, you can get some understanding of why people say ultimate analysis refutes the object, you see? And even why emptiness is comprised by an absence of other powered natures. An absence of it, and an absence of imputational natures in the other emptiness system of Jonang Bashir Piensa. That's interesting. So the proponents of naturelessness answer this consciousness is erroneous. And Asaṅga asks back, is that erroneous consciousness asserted to exist? Or is it asserted not to exist? You see all these by way of its own character in brackets? If it exists, then it is not suitable to say that the naturelessness of all phenomena is the ultimate, since this erroneous consciousness would exist by way of its own character. Naturelessness here in Prasangika means the absence of existence by way of its own character of all phenomena. That's held to be the ultimate. I notice we're reading the translation rather than the... But that's good, because we can see the brackets, right? Okay, anyway, so clear, very clear, sparklingly clear. 229. So since the, let's just say prasangikas, whatever, Mādhyamikas or prasangikas, hold that the naturelessness of all phenomena, of all three natures, their lack of being established by way of their own character, or lack of being established from their own side, is the ultimate. Why does Asaṅga keep picking on other powered natures, about their views on other powered natures? Why does he single out other powered natures? Since the prasangikas hold even Yonrup's lack of Ranshingi Truba. Yogi Gunda Ranshingi Matruba de Yogi Gunda ki Tengi Donyi Tang Chendamyan. The emptiness that's on Yogi Gunda, the ultimate that's on it, because we're dealing with a substratum, Keshi, and Kecher. Keshi is substratum, Kecher is the quality. So, right? Remember, they talk about Tengi, whereas we might say with, right? The ultimate that's with the table. So, why focus on, it's a good question, why focus on other powered natures? That's because other powered natures are the bases, the substrata of thoroughly established nature. That's because other powered natures are the imputing faculties, thoughts and words. So scholars mainly debate about whether just these means other powered natures ultimately exist or not. So the next section is clear. Then, now here we're faced with that imputational natures do not exist is not this system. How helpful these sub-headings are to tell you what's coming up. The Tibetan, of course, is just rnam. And Tsongkhapa's way of doing an outline was not in great detail. And that's one function of commentators. So all I did was to choose here and there, sort of indiscriminately, not just keep with one, but whatever I thought was best I put in, and I didn't necessarily make them all fit. I just wanted it to help a person to the next sentence. So now we're faced with this issue of whether Yugu Gunda exists. So this is Is it to be said that what is posited by way of whatsoever names and whatsoever verbalizations to those other powered things, such as clear realizations, the vocabulary is really hard to penetrate. What are the clear realizations? They are, Jigme Tamsir Gyatso does a fine job of identifying them as contemplation, faith, ethics, true knowledge of clear realization, true knowledge risen from the faculty of finality of clear realization and final clear realization, and thus the path. Obviously, I don't try here to say what everybody says, it would just be boring. Or to say everyone who said, oh, this means Rangitsiniki Truba. Just one's enough. As long as there's an agreement, although I'm a little surprised that I didn't put in here so-and-so offers a different reading. Or is it to be said that it is not the entity of those? Wow, is that hard to read? It is to be said that it is the entity of those conventionally. It is to be said that it is not the entity of those ultimately. So now at least you're going to understand there's some Tanya de Yerba, or Kunzop de Yerba, and they're not Tuntambo Yerba. So there is this category called Gunzop de Yerba. Now, but still the question is, Yerba ko Cherba Rebe, does it function as existing? Does Gunzop de Yerba function as existing? Or is it just Gunzop de Yerba? Gunzop de Yerba, right? You can't rely on it. Just imputed by thought. And then at the end of the next paragraph, he says, because it is imputedly existent, not ultimately existent. So now you see, once some people feel that existing imputedly does not function as existing, then can you include existent imputational natures in the two truths? They're not ultimate truths, are they?
So uncompact space doesn't exist as a conventional truth?
It does in Tsongkhapa system.
Uncompact space is a conventional truth.
Yes.
Therefore,
but there are some who say it's not even a conventional truth.
But therefore, a kunda then exists as a conventional truth.
Gunda, even Gunda.
Even Gunda is conventional truth.
Conventional truth.
Okay.
And Yugi Gunda, of course.
Right.
Yerba.
Right.
Yerba Yimba Kanshik. It's existent, number one. If something exists and is not an ultimate truth, it's a conventional truth. All right? So now you see what these other people are saying. What they're saying is that existent imputational natures don't exist. Why? Because they just imputedly exist. These other people. Okay?
Who are they?
In a certain great commentary on the Sutra Unraveling the Thought, the explanation is not the thought of that sutra when the commentary says, imputational factors, meaning natures, do not exist as either of the two truths. So what does Note A say? Afu Lotri Gyatso cogently holds that Tsongkhapa could not be referring to the very short 10-page commentary, because otherwise why would he call it a great commentary? Even though Tsongkhapa mentions a commentary by Asaṅga at the end of this paragraph. Indeed, well, since it's great, blah, blah, blah. It is likely that Tsongkhapa either did not or would not put any stock in the attribution to Asaṅga, since at the end of this paragraph he draws the conclusion that there also does not appear to be any need for Asaṅga's composing a separate commentary. Well, why? Because he quoted the whole of the Sign Motion Sutra, and that's 1/7 of the pages, you see. And Tsongkhapa says he settled the difficult issues in other parts of the text, although just what parts are interesting to try to find.
Is that Compendium of Ascertainments?
Yes. Now, for Jigme Tamtra Gyatso's attempt to pin down Tsongkhapa's reference, the appendix, see the appendix, the number 2. A great commentary falsely attributed to Asaṅga in 40 sections. And then it quotes this section from Tsongkhapa. And anyway, when you get down to it, it could be Lu Gyaltsen, Jokru Lu Gyaltsen, could be the author. Now, this is the, if you look at the second line from the bottom, this is the commentary attributed to Chanchup Tsutru, and Powers refers to it as that. And I'm saying it's falsely attributed to Chanchup Tsutru. And some people say then it must be by King Trisong Detsen, because he was called Chanchup Tsutru. But in that text, if you look in the indented material, the third line at the end, there's a reference to this text written by the glorious God Emperor Chanchup Tsutru, sovereign of true lords. And it's questionable whether he would have referred to himself that way. Anyway, now, this is an issue to be faced. He also says, though this commentator also says, the dependent arisings of other powered natures of apprehended objects and apprehended subjects exist conventionally. Well, in Tsongkhapa's terms, if we're talking about different substantial entities, then these don't exist even conventionally. Do you follow? They don't exist. They're Mekukunda. But that does have to be added in brackets. But I think it's fair to add it in because that's from Tsongkhapa's perspective. And the Indians and early Tibetans were just talking about Sungzin, not just Sungzin Tse Tade Du Truba. You see why people have gotten so interested in this text, to figure out what's going on. So then, evidence that it's not by Asaṅga is that commentary cites Dharmakirti, which amusingly enough is not that clear. Okay. It is not this system that imputational natures do not conventionally exist and other powered natures do not ultimately exist. Benja Hundu Jigme Gyatso, who's in Guntang and Atru Lotra Gyatso's tradition, and Datin Raptan, who is in Benja Hundup's tradition, so you see you have cross-tradition breakages here, identify the scholar as Jonamba Sherapkin. Sershul, who is in the Benja Hundrup, who's between in time Benja Hundrup and Datin Raptan. Datin Raptan died just, within the last 10 years, I'd say. Says it may be Jonamba Sherapkin. Both Sershul and Jigme Tamtra Gyatso are very independent. So then, the next section is this business about existing conventionally and existing ultimately, and isn't it? Existing conventionally, existing ultimately, and existing as an ultimate truth and existing as a conventional truth. Okay. Oh, the reading for next time is, what should it be? Next chapter or rereading this section of this chapter?
Oh,
Yeah. Reread and see if anything said so far clears up anything. May not, because it's going into a lot of stuff, shall we say. And it's like trying to draw a chart for the Indian penchant for using words in different ways and making something that conventionally exists ultimately exists, you see? I mean, it's really cute. Okay.